Roman Catholic Church in Connecticut is coming out strong against new legislation to get rid of the statute of limitations on child sex abuse cases. Over the weekend, Connecticut's 3 Roman Catholic bishops issued a letter to parishioners against House Bill 5473. Here's part of that letter. Quote, "The nature of bankruptcy litigation puts all assets at risk, even if your parish has had no past incidents, reports, or allegations of child abuse. And this is not simply about bankruptcy or the loss of property. Ultimately, the legislation would undermine the mission of the Catholic Church in Connecticut, threatening our parishes, our schools, and our Catholic charities." Let's talk a little bit about these claims of child abuse. More than 13,000 molestation claims have been filed against clergy since 1950. Bishops say that these claims have cost the church more than $1.5 billion. From what we could find online, only 2 states have no statute of limitations on child sex abuse. They are Alaska and Maine. Those with statutes of limitation vary a great deal. The statutes range from 2 to 30 years. Some statutes start from the point a child reaches 18 or 21, so you can see it's a little confusing depending on where you live. Some start when the victim realizes or remembers that the child abuse occurred. So, Connecticut, which is the one we're talking about today, has the longest statute of limitations, 30 years, and that's 30 years beginning at the age of 18. So basically, if you live in Connecticut and you were sexually abused, you have until your 48th birthday to file suit. Right now, we have one of the supporters of getting rid of even that limitation. Connecticut State Representative Beth joins us from Hartford. And let me start with this, if I can. The basic, you have an awful lot of years involved here. People can be fairly old before they pursue these charges. Why do you think that's not enough? They're almost 50 years old. Is that not enough time?
Well, I think that's a great question. In Connecticut, I represent a district where numerous of my constituents were abused by a doctor at a hospital. And they had made claims earlier, but they had no evidence. And then all of a sudden, while someone was reconstructing a home, 50,000 slides of child pornography fell out of the walls, and these victims finally had the evidence they needed to bring a claim forward. And so they approached me and said, please help us, because in some cases, one brother can make a claim, but the other brother cannot, simply because of their birth date.
Oh, so this is a little bit specific to your area. You're saying that you had a specific concern there. As a general principle, do you think it's a good idea for other states? Should other places be considering this?
Well, I think in the case of child sexual abuse, it's such a heinous crime that it deserves extra time because of some of the aspects of the crime. My co-sponsor had 2 sisters who'd been abused by a parent, and so if this case was brought to me by constituents who were abused by Little League coaches, I'd be moving to have this changed in that case. It's just the evidence that came out was unusual, and we did hear the concerns of the church in the public hearing and have in fact limited it severely after the age of 48, where we changed the bill to say only if you can get through a hearing that shows you have evidence, and then only if you can join an open claim that's filed by someone who's under the statute of limitations. And I didn't feel like over the weekend the church acknowledged those changes that we made in the bills to avoid frivolous lawsuits. It's not about the church. It could be a church, it could be a nonprofit, it could be a business, it could be the state.
So let me interrupt you. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying here. If somebody, for example, who's 62 years old, comes forward and on their own says, I want to report a case of abuse and I want to file a lawsuit from back when I was 9, under your law, they're still told, no, the statute of limitations has run out. If they came forward at 65 and said, there are 15 people who have a case and they're under the age of 48, and I also was abused by that priest, they can join that lawsuit.
Right, by whatever person may have abused them, if there's an open case. So we've tried to make the bar very high once you get past the age of 48 in Connecticut.
So what do you make of the church's complaint that this is really opening up them to tremendous liability here?
Well, I was really disappointed about the announcement from the pulpit this weekend because I don't think they accurately reflected the changes we made in the bill. They obviously have concerns about this legislation and are doing their best to work against it. But if you look at the facts and the idea that we've severely limited your access to make a claim, you have to get through a probable cause hearing, I believe we answered their concerns after we had the public hearing and listened to their concerns.
All right, well, we're going to pick up this conversation in a minute with more of the details on this business of actually reporting sex abuse in the Roman Catholic Churches. Some new developments over the weekend related to that, and how that might affect a lot of people out there who are concerned about this issue. We'll continue our conversation in just a second. Alleged victims of sex abuse by Roman Catholic priests have long claimed a cover-up conspiracy. What they say is that the church really just takes all these matters and wants to hide it from the public, hide it from law, and deal with it themselves or not deal with it. Well, today, the Vatican responded to those thoughts in a very big way. This is a live picture from the Vatican's website, a new guide that spells out their policy on reporting acts of sexual abuse. The Vatican says it's been policy for a long time to abide by civil laws. This new posting says, quote, civil law concerning reporting of crimes to the appropriate authorities should always be followed. In other words, if a priest or a bishop has some suspicion of something going on, they're supposed to call the police. Pope Benedict XVI told Irish bishops last month they should cooperate with civil authorities when investigating abuse. But according to the Associated Press, this is the first time that's been spelled out publicly. And to give you some perspective, the number of sex abuse claims against Roman Catholic bishops and priests has dropped over the past few years. There were 714 claims in 2006. You can see that's down from 783 in 2005 and over 1,000 in 2004. Nationally, incidents are believed to be reported. It's a little tricky on the numbers here. 20% of the time, you can see at the top there, cases are reported. That's what they believe. 25% of those involve females reporting it. 17% involve males reporting it. Now let's bring back Connecticut State Representative Beth by. Beth, let me ask you a big question about this. One of the real concerns has always been that very often the allegations of abuse don't emerge for a long time. First of all, we know this is very traumatic for children, but why does it take so long for some people into their 30s, their 40s, even their 50s?
Yeah, I've talked to so many victims, and you realize that what it is that they're anxious to come forward with this sort of allegation. They think it reflects on them, or somehow it's their fault that they were abused. And so they've put it away in a place, and it has significant impacts on their lives where they don't want to face up to it, and they don't want to report it, or they have no evidence. It's their word against an adult. In my case, I had some victims who described the doctor who abused them as wearing a gun under his lab coat, so they had a lot of fear. People that perpetrate these crimes are very clever, and they're usually in positions of authority, so there are lots of reasons kids don't report.
But how do we deal with the backside of that also, which I know the church has raised concerns about, others have too? What do you do if you're someone who worked with children many years ago, and suddenly 25, 30 years later, somebody comes up who you may not even remember and says, something happened? How does somebody defend against that if they're innocent?
Well, I think part of that's what we tried to address in our law with the probable cause hearing. You have to show evidence. And that's what we were working toward, is to make it stronger so that that couldn't happen. It can happen to anyone that a claim is made, but the person needs to be able to make their case in court. I was so compelled because my victims had photographic and video evidence that wasn't available to them before they were 48 when they first tried to make noise about this happening to them. So now they have evidence, and they can't make a case simply because of their birth date. If you have one brother who can file suit and the other brother cannot, to me, as a legislator, that said to me, you need to think about this law, and that's why it came forward.
Well, we'll see what happens up there, and we'll keep following it, of course. Thanks so much for joining us, Connecticut Representative
Thank you for having me.
Beth By.